Have you ever wondered what happened after humanity vanished in Repo? We thought we had the story figured out, but the Museum of Human Art update made us rethink our theory.
Because with the release of the Museum of Human Art comes new evidence and everything we knew about the end of humankind might be wrong.
This new map doesn't just expand the world, it establishes a timeline. It tells us what really happened to the humans, and maybe even what became of the three main characters we talked about in our first theory.
So buckle up and let's take a look at what we learnt from the Museum of Human Art, including a focus on the timeline and the shocking revelation that we may have got something very wrong last time about our three key players.
At first glance, the museum feels like a love letter to humanity. There's art, culture and expression, the best of what we were.
But look a little closer and it becomes something much darker. The exhibitions don't celebrate humanity, they mourn it.
Every painting, every sculpture, every twisted face on the walls tells the story of our extinction, or our transition.
And it's not just nostalgia, it's evidence. Clues left behind that reveal how humanity fell. But first, let's give a quick recap of version 1 of our theory.
In Repo, a post-apocalyptic world has lost humanity to an unknown disease, AI rebellion and dark experiments. Three brothers, the headmaster, explorer and occultist, each pursued a way to save humankind through cloning, technology and soul magic.
But their efforts backfired. The occultist became a cursed monster known as the Headman. The explorer fused his consciousness with an AI and became the taxman who rules the semi-bots. The headmaster's clones survived, but he perished himself, still working in his office at the academy.
Ultimately, according to version 1 of our theory, Repo explores the cost of immortality and asks what truly defines being human, body, mind or soul. I would certainly recommend checking out that video because we have a ton of evidence to support this. In our first theory, there were three distinct phases in the timeline: before the fall of humanity, then a time when the humans were dying out, and afterwards where humans were gone leaving only semi-bots and monsters, which is the time that the game is set in.
But the museum adds more nuance to the time humans started to die out, making 4 distinct phases.
Phase 1. Before. Everything is normal, humans are thriving, and life went on about more or less as we know it. We know that McJanet Research Station was opened around 1995 or 1998. It's hard to make out in the picture. But from the calendar on the wall, we do know that it was evacuated suddenly on the 14th of April 2097, which is when we hypothesized that Phase 1 ends and Phase 2 starts.
Phase 2, during the change. A virus is unleashed from the research station, and humans start to die out, or at least in version 1 of our theory.
But we now have evidence that the virus didn't kill, it transformed. This virus is the cause of the chaos that twisted humans into the monsters that roam the game.
And we believe that this is when most of the museum's artwork was created. The mix of distorted and more traditionally human faces. There's some indication of humans becoming monsters within the artwork.
There is also evidence in the art that those with money could choose to transfer their minds into semibot, and those without money possibly racking up huge debts to save themselves, which they pay off by becoming a servant of the taxman.
Humanity's choice: sell your soul to the taxman to save your mind, or risk becoming a monster. But it's phase 3 of our timeline that hammers this home. We believe it's during this era that the 2184 AI Workers' Safety Act was legalised, showing that the transfer of human minds into semi-bots was in full swing. This is also when we think cloning was seen as a possible solution to the human extinction issue, as evidenced by the Swiftbroom Academy's Class of 87, which we assume to be 2187, placing it in this phase.
Then Phase 3, the end of humanity. This is when the graffiti found around the museum appears. At this stage, there are 3 factions: the taxman with his semi-bots, the monsters with the magic, and the human group. It's the human group consisting of the last survivors who are leaving warnings and survival tips in the graffiti.
The start of this era is marked by buildings being abandoned, only used by survivors to huddle together for safety, including the Museum of Human Art. The last of the exhibitions being left on stands, and the final banners advertising the last remnants of a society before it completely crumbled.
And the date marking the end of the 3rd phase and marking the loss of social order? Around 23rd of February 2230. This date is found on one of the banners left hanging forever. although it uses the month, day, and year format and leaves the century up for debate. So we've assumed 2230 rather than 2130. And fun fact, outside of the United States, very few countries use this format. However, Greenland, where Mechanic Station is clearly located, is one of them. Begging the question, is all of Repo, including the Museum of Human Art, set in Greenland?
And finally, Phase 4, the present day, when we play. Humanity is gone. Only the semi-bots and the monsters remain. All humans have perished, choosing to become a semi-bot, transformed into a monster by the virus, or leaving their skeletons for us to find. The dates mentioned run over a vast timeline. We're uncertain how long humans have been gone for, but considering the dates range from the 1990s to the 2200s, it would indicate the devs are fond of long timelines. It could be hundreds of years after the last date provided in the evidence.
So what does the museum really tell us? Well, it confirms the virus theory, but it extends it to show that this is the source of the monsters. This is shown by the artwork of viruses around the museum, and the artwork that also shows humans becoming distorted, their bodies warping into monstrous forms.
And that's reinforced by the graffiti. Sketches of transformation, scrawled messages showing these changes.
It's official. The extinction event wasn't just a metaphor. Humans didn't fade away, they mutated.
Which explains why the monsters in Repo feel so personal. They were people once, and this is the reason they drop souls when they die. This is still the story of the mind and soul of humans, semi-bots versus monsters.
The graffiti makes it clear. 3 distinct groups survived the longest.
First, the human resistance, the ones leaving the warnings.
Second, the taxman and his semi-bot network, the system we now serve.
And third, the monsters, infected humans wandering around their previous workplaces, homes, universities, and hangout spots.
But what's interesting is the tone of the graffiti. Some humans blame the taxman, often depicting the taxman and semi-bots with crossed out eyes. Others are trying to survive the monsters with hints and tips. And some, they just seem tired.
It's almost like the survivors don't know who the real enemy is anymore, and we're just trying to get through one day at a time.
In our first theory, we explore the idea that the Repo story revolves around 3 brothers, the headmaster, the explorer, and the occultist.
In version 1, we linked them to each one of the maps, with the explorer associated with Mechanic Research Station, the headmaster being the head wizard in Swiftbroom Academy, and the occultist being linked to Headman Manor. But the museum adds a wrinkle. How does it link to the other locations and the story the game developers are trying to tell?
It showed us that magic played a part in the monster's evolution. We had originally suggested that blood rituals that pointed to the occultist were to blame for the monsters, but this new evidence seems to suggest it was nature rather than human intervention that created these monsters.
We've always wondered how some of the monsters seem to possess the same magical beam as the staff. The new graffiti suggests that the wizard, possibly Dumb Golf himself, gave magic to the creatures.
This can be seen in this hidden mural of the monster known as Clown being gifted the magic from a staff identical to Dumgolf's staff found in the Swiftbroom Academy.
In our original theory, we proposed the headmaster passed away, the explorer became the taxman, and the occultist became the monster headman. But maybe the occultist wasn't the one who became the headman after all. Maybe it was the headmaster, the brother who once sought knowledge at Swiftbroom Academy and gifted the monsters with his power.
That would explain the "It's the headmaster" graffiti from the academy. We weren't sure what to do with that information before, but the museum gives us more to think about.
The headmaster might have realised his fate, that he would become a monster, and struck a deal with one of his brothers before his transformation. This idea was inspired by some of the very specific graffiti in the museum depicting a robed figure.
His face is reminiscent of the monster called the Headman, and he is holding the wizard staff from Swiftbroom Academy, which is known as Dumgolf's staff. Not only does this link the idea of transformation of this human monster appearance, but the figure is underneath the human group graffiti, with even a hole you can fall down.
It's like the developers are telling us this robed figure was undermining the human group somehow.
In addition, this deal between brothers might be what we see in the painting of 2 headless men shaking hands, which is found all over Headman Manor. It's an agreement between brothers on opposite sides, evidence we weren't sure what to do with when we had 3 brothers.
So, if the headmaster became the headman, where does this leave the occultist?
The skeleton in the headmaster's office still haunts us, literally and figuratively.
In version 1, we thought that it was the headmaster himself. After all, it's the headmaster's office, and he's wearing the starred pointy hat.
Evidence in the pictures of Swiftbroom Academy hinted that there might have been clones or copies, more than one version of the same man.
Maybe that skeleton isn't the original headmaster at all, but one of his creations. Or, in another painting, it is implied a wizard is the turncoat to humanity, but not necessarily the headmaster specifically. This is indicated by a buckle on the hat rather than the headmaster's, which has stars on it. This particular wizard in the painting is hiding behind or is in communication with the taxman.
This is all pretty confusing. The headmaster becomes the headman monster, but there's also a body in the headmaster's office. Meanwhile, the occultist might have been one of the other teachers or clones, and they could have been the ones supplying magic to the monsters.
This changes our theory that the portraits in Swiftbroom Academy aren't one person, but a set of clones. Different, but the same.
This would explain that it's the headmaster and the clues that it is a wizard who grants the monsters the powers of magic. It was someone who looked like the headmaster, or the body in the headmaster's office is one of the clones.
But imagine a wizard with the power of magic realizing he was transforming into a monster. He was about to swap teams.
If the transformation was slow enough, it would make sense to want to empower your new identity. When you have no choice in becoming, it would make sense to take your magic and imbue your fellow monsters with it.
What was once used to defend the human group is now literally used to undermine their existence. Is this what the graffiti showing the man who looks eerily like the headman-human hybrid holding Dungolf's staff power was showing us?
The museum challenges the idea that there were three brothers at all.
There's graffiti of two players locked in a stalemate, a game of noughts and crosses with the word draw underneath.
A draw between two sides, two brothers, two ideologies.
With this new theory, it makes the occultist redundant. He no longer creates the monsters, as they are the result of the virus. There's evidence of blood rituals and sacrifice, but these could be explained by the headmaster's transformation and rise to power as he becomes the monster known as the headman. What if the occultist and the headmaster were the same person? That would leave only two brothers, the explorer and the headman occultist hybrid. That makes a lot of the previous evidence make more sense.
And the handshake picture suddenly makes perfect sense. Or at least more sense, as it would only imply the taxman and the monsters are in cahoots.
However, this begs the question, who is the portrait we assume was the occultist? This is the evidence that led us to believe there were three brothers in the first place.
Well, maybe that's just an earlier portrait of the mysterious explorer, his younger self. That would indicate that these buildings have a history to consider, not just a point in time within lore considerations.
Despite all the darkness, the museum also shows flickers of humanity's final moment. Comedic posters, messages about surviving without possessions, and even hints that people were trying to normalize the monsters. Even going as far as, during the end of days, running comedy clubs laughing about the extinction of humanity, as shown in the graffiti.
Yeah, and those banners labelling the monsters as creatures of folklore almost feels like propaganda, like they were trying to calm the panic.
But in the end, it didn't work. The graffiti turns desperate, the humour fades, the halls of the museum become memorials, not messages.
And here's the strangest part. Some of the artwork doesn't feel human at all.
The proportions are off. The symbolism doesn't quite make sense. Like it was made by something trying to understand humanity, but not quite getting it right.
And maybe that's because the art wasn't actually made by humans, but by semi-bots trying to reconstruct what human culture looked like from memory or data. After all, if the semi-bots are human minds transferred into a metal body, how much is lost in that translation?
Their minds saved, but at what cost? Perhaps the former humans lost some of their memory when becoming an AI, losing the context of humanity.
After all, the AI in the real world is well known for making things up to bridge its gap of human understanding, while still trying to be helpful, and these are known as AI hallucination.
That would explain the weird milk carton, oversized, warped, like it's an AI's best guess.
And there are others like this, like the square basketball, or the traffic lights that don't seem to work quite as intended. It's eerie, but fitting. The Museum of Human Art might have been originally made for human art, but the museum has become warped by their replacements, the semi-bots who were once human.
Echoes of memories that milk cartons used to be a thing, but lacks the context of what they were used for, or their size. and other notable functional aspects of the items that were only understood by the dead culture that used them, the humans.
And where would this AI versus human line be drawn? Would a former human turned semi-bot no longer be able to show their artwork in this museum?
And if you needed one last reminder not to trust everything you see, the museum gives it loud and clear. Semi-works. Don't trust them.
This graffiti calls the devs liars. It's graffiti unlike any other in the museum. It looks like a stencil has been used, and it echoes the same font that the logo of Semiworks uses. It's like their in-game company by the same name is calling the real Semiworks accuracy into question.
So when the devs drop their lore hints or teasers, maybe we should take them with a grain of salt.
Perhaps after all is said and done, the taxman isn't the only manipulator in this story.
So what does this mean for Repo's lore? The Museum of Human Art doesn't just add a new map, it gives us a clearer picture of the fall of humanity.
The virus, the factions, the brothers' shifting loyalties. It's all part of the same tragic cycle. Humanity tried to survive through magic, technology and mind transfer, and in the end, they became the very thing they feared, extinct.
But as always, this is just a theory, a version built on new evidence in the Museum of Human Art.
If you want to see how all this started and how our ideas evolved, go watch our first Repo Theory video next. It's linked right here and in the description. And subscribe as we explore the latest update and what that has in store for version 3 of our theory.
New locations within the maps, new items and new monsters. Will version 2 of our theory hold up? What are your thoughts? And if you've spotted something we've missed in the museum update, do tell us. We read every comment and we love diving into your theories.
Because in the world of Repo, one thing is for sure, nothing is ever as it seems.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time in the next update of our evolving theory.